Thanks to Aaron and the team here at IISS for all of the work you've been doing on Myanmar, for all of the focus and attention you've been putting on all the expertise you've been bringing to what is truly a very difficult problem. The current situation in Burma remains a top priority for the Biden administration. You heard the Secretary of Defense earlier today speak about this region as a center of strategic gravity for the United States and geopolitics generally. And so therefore what happens in Burma matters a lot to what happens in Southeast Asia, which matters a lot to the broader Indo-Pacific, which therefore matters a lot to core U.S. national security interests, which is why we have been very focused on the situation in Burma. Nolene has spoken very eloquently about the horrors we are seeing on the ground. And in the 16th month since the coup, we've seen the Burmese military regime escalate its conflict, having killed more than 1,800 million people, terrorize many civilians. We've got more than 500,000 displaced, imprisoned tens of thousands, committing egregious abuses against those in detention. The regime has shown a complete unwillingness to negotiate or seek any kind of off-ramp here. Instead, it's attempting to consolidate power and really just ramp up its assault. Yet, beneath this horrific brutality, we see a very insecure and isolated regime, one that is facing a growing and resilient popular resistance movement. And while the military claims that it can control the country, in reality, the political economic control remain contested, and the military regime has shown that it is fundamentally incapable of creating stability. And we're seeing increasing fissures within the military itself. A growing number of countries are publicly engaging with the pro-democracy movement, and many international companies have divested from military-owned enterprises and are increasing scrutiny of the regime's financial transactions, which is further squeezing the military's resources. So the United States' overall goal in Burma remains to foster the conditions that end this conflict and put Burma on a path towards an inclusive, representative, multi-party democracy. And I think the recent federal democratic charter that was released by the Democratic opposition is quite inspiring. It's quite ambitious. It's an outline for a multi-layered federalism. And as Nolene said, the people of Burma have changed in the last 16 months. And I think we should support them in their ambitions. Now, since the coup, the United States has worked tirelessly with our allies and partners to advance this goal to achieve an inclusive, representative, multi-party Burma, while also addressing the humanitarian crisis that is caused by the military's brutal crackdown. And let me highlight three important lines of effort of U.S. policy. First, we are stepping up our economic and political pressure on the regime while doing all we can to limit the regime's access to weapons and dual-use technologies. Second, we are supporting the pro-democracy movement. And third, we are working to deliver critical humanitarian assistance directly to the people of Burma. And let me go through these quickly. First, on the point of pressure. Since the coup, the United States, along with other allies and partners, have administered serious sanctions against the junta. The United States has sanctioned more than 70 individuals, including representatives of the military and others that are responsible for the violence. We've also sanctioned 27 entities that are tied to the regime or connected to the regime's supporters. We've also added numerous military entities, including militarily-owned enterprises, to the entity list to ensure that they cannot benefit from U.S. exports. And this ties to the second critical line of effort, and that is support for the pro-democracy movement. Alongside our economic sanctions against the regime, we provided pro-democracy actors with resources, and we've given emergency assistance to well over 1,000 civil society activists. I and my colleagues in Washington have met numerous times with Burmese human rights defenders, representatives of the civil disobedience movement, and senior representatives of the NUG, At the same time that the minister here was meeting with the NUG foreign minister, we also met with her at the State Department on the same day of the U.S.-ASEAN Special Summit, and we encourage other countries, either here in Southeast Asia or around the world, to be engaged with the NUG and other democracy actors. Finally, we are providing humanitarian aid directly to the people of Burma. Again, Nolene spoke very eloquently about the urgent humanitarian needs that are faced there. I recently was near Mae Sot in Thailand, where we were able to look and meet with folks that the United States is helping to assist through NGOs. The United States remains the largest single donor in response to the crisis in Burma, and we've provided more than $434 million in life-saving humanitarian assistance and nearly $250 million in COVID-19 related assistance to the people of Burma. Now, in all of this, we are coordinating closely with our allies and partners. You heard the Secretary of Defense talk this morning about the strategic power of partnerships, and this is very much animates our approach to Burma, working with ASEAN and its members, but also with other countries, United Kingdom, European Union, Australia, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and others. Last year's ASEAN landmark decision not to allow senior regime representatives to attend high-level ASEAN events sent a powerful message to the regime that it will remain isolated from its immediate neighbors until it stops the violence and it comes to the negotiating table. At the U.S. ASEAN Summit last month in Washington, our leaders released a joint vision statement that reaffirmed ASEAN unity on this issue. The statement called for a timely and complete implementation of the 5-point consensus and the release of all political detainees, while highlighting ASEAN's efforts to facilitate a peaceful solution in the interests of the people of Burma. And the joint vision statement also welcomed the work of the ASEAN Special Envoy and the Secretary General's Special Envoy. And I do want to take the opportunity here to thank Nolene Heiser for your efforts to engage the various communities and stakeholders to garner support in the international community to help mitigate and end this crisis. Now, in looking ahead to the future, as the military's position weakens, and it is weakening, we must be prepared to continue seeking creative opportunities to support the democracy movement while also increasing pressure on the military. We cannot lose our focus. And we also have to prepare ourselves for the year that follows. The regime does claim that it wants to hold elections in 2023. We think that that prospect is a farce. We don't believe that we should endorse such elections. We don't see how they can have any chance of being free or fair. Given that the regime has imprisoned or intimidated nearly all credible political contenders, and in fact it's threatening and might execute some in the coming days. So instead, we must increase the pressure on the regime to release political prisoners, not execute them, enter a credible and inclusive dialogue with the pro-democracy movement, which is going to be a necessary step in any legitimate political process. But we ought to be really clear here. The road ahead is going to be very difficult. There are no silver bullets. But even with everything else going on in the world and all the demands that we have been talking about over the course of this conference and that we are facing every day in Washington, we must remain focused on supporting the people of Burma in their struggle to put their country on the path towards democracy. The people of Burma have suffered under the military's tyranny for far too long, and they deserve our full support. So I want to thank you all again for the time. I'm looking forward to the discussion. There's a lot of expertise around this table, and we need all the ideas we can get to help solve this incredibly difficult and urgent crisis. Thank you again.
Thanks, Councillor. We'll now turn to the floor for questions.